And in this video, I am going to show you that as a Christian, you do not have free will. I know you want to have free will. I know that free will is the answer to the problem of suffering. I know that free will is the only thing that can make sense of the carrot and stick coercive love relationship that you want to have with your Savior.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Hey guys, it's the Jesus Freak here. This is the channel where I, as a anonymous, very baby Christian, react to different events, and I try to apply a biblical perspective on things. The thing about Joel Reads the Bible, I found him during my intense research, my intense ongoing research of Jesus and God and the Bible. I saw he had a channel called Joel Reads the Bible, and so I click on it thinking this is going to be a guy who's going to be explaining the Bible in good faith. But he doesn't. Joel has this very intense, negative view of the God of the Bible, and it seeps into his interpretation of everything, with video titles such as God Loves Abortion and Propaganda. He does bring up some good and interesting questions, but the conclusion that he comes to in the end is that God is a big old meanie bobini, therefore he doesn't exist, and therefore Christians shouldn't follow him. But on this particular episode of Joel Reads the Bible, as he tries to dismantle Christianity by completely dismantling the concept of free will itself, you can't help but feel like Joel is very confused about what free will actually means when we use that as a word. I actually sat down and watched this Joel Reads the Bible episode with my husband. He's a skeptic, he's not a Christian, but one thing we both agree on is that Joel is kind of confusing sometimes.
So the first thing I want to do is define our terms to a degree. I want to give you the dictionary definition of free will. And then once I give it to you, we're going to throw it in the garbage. It is not what you mean when you say free will. The dictionary definition of free will: the power of acting without the constraint of necessity or fate. Okay, the ability to act at one's own discretion. So what that seems to be saying is a free will decision has to be a decision made without having to make the decision, or some sort of fate befalling you because you made the decision. It seems very difficult to imagine a world where this level of free will exists. It's very obvious that we are beings which do not have this level of free will. Everything we do has consequences.
Okay, so the definition he was just reading out isn't speaking on the consequences. It was talking about not having to do something based off of necessity or will by fate, talking about determinism.
Yeah.
And so for him to say, like, we don't know human lives like this because there's consequences to our actions, like, no, that doesn't make that. It's like you have the free will to shove your hand in a blender. It's like, you know, and it's like that's not a decision made off of necessity. You weren't like it. Unless you are one of those people that uses the lens of determinism for everything, it's not like you're fated to shove your hand in the blender.
No.
And it has consequences. And it's like, well, what's the point of bringing up the fact that my hand will be mangled up if I put my hand in the blender when all I'm saying is that I had the choice to do so?
Yeah, you have the choice to do so. And if you look at the first definition of free will, right underneath that definition, there is a real life application, an example, if you will, of free will. A free will donation. And a donation would be an example of something that you could do that is not necessary or necessarily destined. It would be something that you did of your own free will. So I don't know how Joel could claim that this definition of free will doesn't exist with the evidence right there in front of him underneath that definition. But let's let him finish.
Every cause we cause has an effect, right? And things affect us. We'll get into that later. Even choosing to drink this glass of water is not entirely a free will choice. I have to drink water.
In order to prove that he has no control over anything, this man decides to drink a glass of water. This was not a survival thing. He decided to drink water to demonstrate how he has no free will. You can't make this up.
If I want to go and jump off my balcony, there's going to be fate involved. I can't just do that and fly away. So it's not really a free will choice. I don't have the free will to jump off my balcony, land, not break anything, and feel perfectly fine and run away. We don't have free will based on the dictionary definition. I think that's pretty obvious. So we can just throw that away because you don't mean that definition when you say free will.
It's like what he's actually talking about is like you don't have the ability to just turn reality into whatever you want. It's like his argument doesn't make any sense because it's like if I jump off my balcony, it's knowing the consequence of what will happen when I jump off of it. That doesn't make my choice knowing that consequence not a choice that I'm making. That doesn't make any sense.
He even describes drinking water as something that you're doing against your will because you know you need to drink water to survive.
I mean that there's a gray area there where you can make that case because like you can't just choose whether or not you're a being that drinks water because if you don't drink water you'll die. And so you're forced to drink water by the restrictions of your own biology. So but then to extend that to you can't just choose to jump off your balcony and then land and be fine and run off. It's like that doesn't. You're going way beyond the mark there.
Yeah, you have the freedom, if we want to call it that, the freedom to jump from your balcony.
Mm-hmm. Knowing that what's going to happen if you jump.
Yes.
Like if I'm trying to think of a scenario in which I'm not exercising my free will, it's like whenever I was younger, I used to sleepwalk and like pee on stuff. I didn't decide to do that. I just don't understand this leap that he's making about not being able to change the consequences of an action you're taking, so therefore it's not truly free will. Like, I don't understand the argument.
And just like that, Joel was thoroughly debunked and destroyed by a team of experts. His water-drinking shenanigans were no match for just basic logic and reasoning. But Joel is going to completely abandon this first definition of free will and argue against the Christian definition, because apparently us Christians are a monolith and we have our own separate idea of what free will is.
So when Christians talk about free will, and when I spoke about free will when I was a Christian, I did not mean the dictionary definition of free will, because if I did, it would be so obvious that we didn't have free will. What I meant was something that people might call free choice. Even though there's consequences, I am still free to make that choice. I have the agency to make that choice. I have the autonomy to make the choice. These are all just different words that sort of seem like the same thing, but they don't have that level of free will that probably only a God would have. In a lot of my videos, I mentioned that God does things that are arbitrary at his whim. That is free will. Although there may be consequences for us, there are no consequences for him.
I'm pretty sure that free will is referring to the reality in which we live in. Like, he's expanding, like, no, he's narrowing definition such that it only means that you're free to manipulate reality as you wish. That's his argument. He's saying it's like
If I can't jump off my balcony and resurrect myself, I don't have free will.
yeah, it's like I just don't understand why the distinction would be made there. Like I don't think that there's a. I mean, I guess we can tell by what he's saying that what he means by free will, what he means is like the thought that comes up in his head when that word is said by him or others is the idea that you can actually just change a reality. That's what he thinks like free will is.
When we're talking about being able to make a free choice or having agency over the choices that we make, the way I think of it, and this is really where it falls apart for me, you have to be able to make this choice entirely free from influence. I would say that as soon as you're somewhat influenced, free will, I'm going to call it free will colloquially, but just so you know, I'm not referencing the dictionary definition. I'm using more of the agency, being able to make a choice that's free from influence sort of thing, where we're still constrained by our reality, but we're still free to make a choice. So I don't think that if I am influenced, that I can call my choice free. If I don't choose my influences, how can I claim that the thing that I do that is compelled by those influences is free?
Okay, so I get what he's saying. He's saying that there's like environmental factors that shape the way you even think, but it's impossible to live in a reality in which you aren't influenced to some degree.
Joel claims that we can't possibly have free will because there's always influence, there's always consequences. And that doesn't really make sense to me. That's like saying, I don't believe in gravity because gravity has limits. I think free will has limits. There's environmental factors, there's personality stuff, but we still can make the choices. I don't think free will has to be absolutely limitless for it to exist. Joel feels like free will can't exist unless it exists within these constraints that he's created, right? Like we don't have free will unless we can control everything in the world, literally.
The choice that you're making is an illusion of choice because all it is your biological influences and environmental influences reacting to the stimuli that's coming at you. The reason why that's not free is because you didn't choose any of those things. And you can't transcend them. You can't get outside of them in order to make a decision that vessel wouldn't make. It doesn't make any logical sense.
I think that's a really dour and dire way of looking at life. Like you're just a puppet chemically reacting to everything that's happening to you. You don't have any real control. If you're someone who holds that worldview, how do you feel? Are you sad?
You, as a Christian, you may be like, yeah, obviously, without God, you don't have any free will. You're just a puppet. You're just a robot. But I would say that with God, you absolutely also do not have any free will. But here's what I've been calling theistic determinism. So it's the idea that we have an all-knowing creator. But because he's the creator and he's all-knowing, he is creating you specifically and deliberately from scratch. And if you want to read Psalms 139, 16 to 19, it describes this. A lot of you will know it. You knit me together in my mother's womb. When I was in the darkest place, you knew me. You've made my innermost being. All my days were ordained by you. God has created us. He's programmed our DNA. If you're a Christian who's heard the intelligent design argument, you'll hear that DNA is like a computer language. It's like a code. There needs to be a coder. Okay. Well, God coded that DNA. Somebody wrote that. That's an algorithm. That doesn't have free will. That's been programmed specifically and deliberately to do a task. and he knows how that program is going to work. He's programmed that computer program to run a certain way. He could do a different code and know that there would be a different outcome. He's in complete control.
Okay, so a couple things here. So I think it is an interesting point. It's like, well, if it's your view that God created you, and you combine that view with the idea that God is what is the word? Omnipotent. And then you combine that with the idea that God created you for a purpose, and all these together would lead to someone making some kind of deterministic kind of argument. But like, I can imagine making like a game like with AI, some kind of AI creature that I give certain parameters in order to navigate the virtual reality that I've created for it. And so I can program it to do things such as move. And so I can tweak all these different parameters, but also make it to where, given those parameters, it's starting to make choices that aren't choices that I've made for it, but based off of the programming that I did create, it can start to make choices within those parameters. And so you can make the argument that there's some level of determinism in terms of like creating the parameters and programming the virtual reality that this creature lives in, and also the other side of it, which would be not deterministic, which is to see what the creature does within the virtual reality based on parameters that you set around it.
That was one of the best explanations for a God-given free will that I've ever heard. I think that Joel has a very narrow view of what God can and can't do and should and shouldn't do. He puts these arbitrary constraints around God. Even though he doesn't believe in God, he seems to think that if there was a God, then he would behave in this specific way when it comes to free will.
God doesn't just know what you're going to do. God makes you to do it. He has created you in such a way to do what you're going to do. So when you make a choice, this is a choice that God made you to make. I just cannot logically fathom the place where all of a sudden free will exists.
An all-powerful, omnipresent God is not bound by our very narrow and limited human logic. You can do all the speculating and guessing in the world, as Joel does here, but ultimately, we can't know everything. We do have the Bible, which gives us plenty of examples of how God interacts with humans who have free will and who don't always do what he wants them to do. Joel makes it seem like God is specifically forcing everyone to do what they're doing. And it makes me wonder if he's ever read the Bible and had a genuine understanding of anything that he's read. The Bible is the greatest reference point to see God's nature and to see how it interacts with human nature. And there's some of you out there that might say, well, I don't believe the Bible. Well, if you're going to argue against the Bible and argue against the God that is expressed and presented in the Bible, then you should probably understand what the Bible is saying about him. And in the Bible, we do see a God who has allowed humans to make decisions that he is not always on board with. You have verses such as this, where God says they have built the high places of Baal to burn their children in the fire as offerings to Baal. Something I did not command or mention, nor did it enter my mind. So if God is controlling everything that people do, then why is he saying he did not command the burning of the children in the fire. It's because there's free will in the Bible. But for some reason, Joel attempts to paint free will as this sort of Christian fairy tale imagining, as if we're delusional because we think that we have some control over our actions.
So Christians want to say that, well, we just have free will. The idea of free will just becomes a magical claim, just another Christian magical claim. There's no logic to it. It has to be some sort of like, shwing, God gave us free will. No, but he gave us free will. No, but he gave us free will. But free will is not a good thing for us. I don't know if it's a good thing for God. I don't think it is if he loves us. If free will is the answer to the problem of suffering, so why is there so much violence in this world and pain and suffering? Well, it's because we have free will. God doesn't want to take away our free will, so he lets us do what we're going to do. It's our choices. Then take away the free will. Like, if the free will is a curse, I don't know about you, I would gladly give up my free will so that the 600,000 people who are getting sexually assaulted this year won't get assaulted.
Free will is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blurse. There's a lot of beauty that comes from it. There's also a lot of pain and suffering. And yes, that does include the occasional horizontal struggle with a man. It is noble for Joel to offer to give up his free will to get rid of rapes, but I just don't believe I don't believe him. Or at least I don't think he has fully considered what it would mean to submit yourself completely to God. He hates God's perspective on things. And so he wouldn't want to live in a world where God has completely removed free will so that we couldn't do evil. There would be no abortion. There'd be no gender confusion. There'd be no whatever this is. There'd be none of the things that liberals enjoy, basically. God has a prescription for how to lead a righteous life, but he doesn't force anyone to take it. He lets us make our own decisions, and because of that, he also allows evil for a time. But just because God allows evil doesn't mean that he condones it. If you'd like a quick little demonstration of God's general attitude towards evil, I highly recommend Deuteronomy chapter 32. The Israelites are just about to enter the promised land. They're right there on the cusp. And their leader, Moses, is giving them a special message from God where he warns them of the misfortune that's going to come against them if they turn away from God and towards evil. I will heap calamities on them and spend my arrows against them. I will send wasting famine against them, consuming pestilence. Pestilence? Pestilence? And deadly plague. I will send against them the fangs of wild beasts, the venom of vipers that glide in the dust. In the street the sword shall make them childless. In their homes terror will reign. The young men and young women will perish, the infants and those with gray hair. I'm not gonna lie, my first time reading through this passage, I felt ill at ease. Especially this one. The infants.
Oh my God!
It was the infants for me. But this is a warning from God to his chosen special people about what will happen to them if they turn away from him, if they abuse their free will and start doing evil things. And it makes sense that if you live in a country that's abandoned God and any sort of semblance of objective morality, people are going to suffer. God does demonstrate wrath against evil, but he also shows mercy. And since I live in a country that casually murders over 600,000 unborn children a year, I am very grateful for that mercy. But for the person that is resistant to the idea of believing in God, because he doesn't deal with evil in the way that they would like for him to deal with it, they kind of take that as him either A, not existing, or B, 2, he is indifferent towards our suffering. Even Joel makes the comment that if God was loving, then he would treat us in this specific way. Then he would give us a perfect life on earth with no struggles. And I would argue that God's love language is different than what most people might imagine. God demonstrated his love for us by coming to earth in human form, suffering, struggling, dying a painful, terrible, and slow death to atone for all of our sins. So when our very short time on earth is up, everyone who believed in the name of Jesus Christ will be saved. And by saved, I mean not here. So what did we learn today? I think I disproved Joel's assumption that Christians don't have free will. I think that if you read the Bible, you can see that there is a constant theme of God saying one thing and humans doing a completely different and terrible thing. And as for Joel's assertion that free will is a bad thing for Christians, I don't really agree with that all the way. I do think that free will obviously does bring consequences. It does bring a lot of evil and nasty, nasty stuff into the world. But ultimately, God has a plan to restore and redeem the world through Jesus Christ. So, problem solved. I found Joel's video on free will to be very, very interesting. I have to make a part 2 to this video because it's just, he gets into so much and I can't put it all in this one video. I mean, I could, but like, I don't want to do that. I want to do something else. So I will see you guys in another video, hopefully soon. And let me know in the comments how you feel about this. If you're a Christian, do you feel like you have free will? If you're not a Christian, do you agree with Joel? Do you feel puppeteered in any way? Let me know. I will see you guys in another one. Bye.